Welcome to Dev Better, the show where we talk about the organizational and software engineering challenges that we have encountered as a software development consulting firm. Today, we're going to talk about something near and dear to my heart, developer experience. Motivated to squeeze every penny of profit out of every cog in the company machine, some leaders and organizations adopt flawed measures of developer productivity, then use these metrics to drive developers to work harder, faster, and longer, but definitely not smarter. These numbers and management decisions they inform give the appearance of levers and knobs that leaders can pull and turn to optimize the software development machine. But what they actually do is drive a lot of frantic activity that leads to less, not more, business value. Now, some of these measures are useful for other purposes, just not for measuring developer productivity, and others, not so much. My guest today believes that these misguided metrics of developer productivity are doing active harm to software engineering teams while reducing the quality and the value of the software that they produce. He proposes a better metric, developer experience, or DX. And he says that measuring DX leads to better leadership decisions and organizational policies with a whole host of benefits that include increased developer productivity, business value, and retention of skilled engineers. All right. Hi, I'm Jeremy. I am your host of Dev Better. With me, I am extremely excited to have Abi Noda of Get DX. Say hi, Abi.
Hey, Jeremy. Good to be here.
Thank you for joining us. I just want to say real quick that I've been stalking you for a long time. That may make you feel creepy. But I remember back when you started Pull Panda, I used your product when I started my company because GitHub was just complete garbage with respect to learning if a PR is out there and going stale. And I saw you sell that to GitHub, which is awesome. Congratulations. And I've been following you ever since. And a lot of what you put on the internet, I respect highly. I'm very excited about what you're trying to do with the idea of developer experience. I love all of the awesome conversations that you have had with the folks that you brought on your podcast and all of your LinkedIn stuff and the studies that you guys are working on. So I just want to say awesome. We love you guys here. We're super excited whenever you come out with a new post. I often say you're my spirit animal. Hopefully it doesn't offend you because you say a lot of the things that I want to say as well, which is phenomenal. So we're here today to talk about developer experience. And the first thing I want to kick off with is what are some of the flawed metrics that we've seen in our industry that companies use to define what's called developer productivity? And I'm going to hand it over to you. Talk to us about that. I'll intersperse with my own experience, but what are some things that sort of grind your gears?
Yeah, I mean, first, it's important to acknowledge, this whole measurement thing, measuring developer productivity, it's super hard, right? It's not, I mean, people have been trying to do this for decades. There's all these researchers working on this problem. I've been working on this problem way too long. It's really hard.
Yeah, it is.
So it's important to acknowledge that and, kind of look it through current practices through that lens. But, the sort of predominant conventional approach to measuring quote unquote, developer productivity has been to count the work that developers do. Yeah. Super intuitive idea to do that. And it's like, what do developers do? They write code. So, okay, let's count how much code they produce, or let's count how many tickets they knock out.
Yeah.
And of course, those metrics don't capture the full story. I mean, for starters, a line of code isn't equal to another line of code. A ticket isn't equal to another ticket, right? Pull requests aren't all created equal. Then there's a problem of developers do a lot of work that's not actually captured in code or in tickets. They help each other out. They do design. They architect things. They fix bugs. They support customers. And so this entire idea of reducing developer productivity down to the activity metrics of developers or the output of developers is unfortunately a very limited view of developer productivity. And most companies, I think, realize that. Some companies that realize that still do it because gives them something. It's not perfect, but it gives them something. Research certainly agrees with this point. I mean, there's, as I post a lot about research coming out. And Google talks about this, Microsoft talks about this constantly, that hey, we can't reduce developer productivity down to just pull requests or tickets or lines of code. There's much more to the story. And that's really kind of the problem I've been trying to figure out for the last, like I said, way too long, 7-8 years, is so how can we understand and measure productivity in ways that give us a more holistic view and tell us more of the story?
I think that we can safely blame bad enterprise Scrum for like 99% of my PTSD for this particular idea, like using story points as lagging and leading metrics. And I mean, you've actually posted on things like cycle time and whip time being weaponized as well, which, I'm a fan of Kanban. We do Kanban here, and I think Kanban gives you a lot more telemetry, especially if you do predictive forecasting, right? And I think it gives you some things that you can lean into. But the concept and the idea of weaponizing these metrics is something that a lot of developers were just very scared of. You're tracking my pull requests. Okay, well, that means I have to be in my seat and work extra hard, right? So what are some of the ramifications of collecting these metrics that you've seen? And again, a lot of the studies you post talk about this, but give us a summary for some of the anti-patterns that you've seen on metrics.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is as soon as you kind of institute a metric, and especially if that metric is explicitly or implicitly sort of, elevating certain teams or classifying teams as high performing or low performing, as soon as you do that, it affects behavior, right?
Mm-hmm.
Teams or individuals are like, oh, hey, like the people with the better metrics are going to get more money or not
Mm-hmm.
get fired. So I better make my metrics go up. And the problem in engineering is when we look at metrics like lines of code or number of commits, number of pull requests, or even the metrics you just talked about, things like cycle time and lead time, or the DORA metrics, deployment frequency. The problem is that, like, as soon as those metrics turn into targets, it changes the way we work in very negative ways. Like you don't want developers just writing things with more lines of code. Like that's worse. We want less lines of code overall.
Right.
You don't want developers just chopping up their work into like unnecessarily small units just to have faster cycle times. Like that doesn't do anyone good. It doesn't help the business. It doesn't help the development team, right? It doesn't help anyone. And so anytime you institute one of these metrics and it becomes elevated sort of beyond a tool for understanding and becomes something that teams are trying to optimize for, it can backfire. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, not only is the sort of the distorted behavior there hurtful to the business, but developers hate that stuff, right? Like they hate,
Yes, we
oh
do.
my gosh, like our managers are, measuring us by these completely stupid metrics. Like it just hurts morale. And, I just posted about a paper from Google that
Mm-hmm.
discusses this within Google. They talked about how they studied this and how they saw that measuring developer activity hurts morale. Not only that there wasn't a lot of value in doing that justified the negative effects and consequences. So I think it's important for leaders. I think most are aware of this problem, but it's really difficult. Again, it goes back to what I led with. Like this measuring productivity stuff is really hard, and there's a lot of unintended consequences from well-intentioned, decisions and actions on behalf of leadership.
Right. Again, you hit it on the head. There's nothing wrong with collecting telemetry, right? Telemetry is great. It helps us understand the machine more. It's when a metric ceases to be, becomes a target, it ceases to be valuable, right, at all. And I love that idea because I've been an engineer for a long time. I was a developer for a decade before I started this company, and now I pretend like I'm a CEO, and I do a very good job at pretending. And I think that the thing that I learned is that anytime I was in a system where things were being gamified, like I would gamify Scrum, I would be like, well, this is easy. All I have to do is break my commits up, and who cares about the quality of the code? I can meet that client's specifications by simply just playing around and spend 4 hours of my day doing work and meeting all of the metric criteria, and the remaining 4, I'm like, screw it, I'm going to go watch Netflix. I mean, people think that developers are like cogs in a machine, and we're not smart. We're very smart people. Like, we've spent our entire careers learning how to play in these systems, and again, I blame a lot of the agile enterprise nonsense for this, and sort of the gamification of Scrum and the abuse of Scrum, and all these things that we've seen that are anti-patterns in the agile world, I think have really driven us towards very, very bad practices. And so some of the organizational policies that are being put in place, like number of pull requests, number of changes and commits and lines, like these are things that are just toxic, and they're not helping our industry get better, and they're not helping us as a team or as an industry develop better code. Instead, again, we're focusing on how do I game the system? How do I, go home and shut off my laptop and not have somebody like emailing me because I didn't meet my pull request quota for the day.
Yeah,
Cool.
absolutely.
All right, so you've proposed this idea of developer experience, or what's the difference? Like, aren't you still measuring things?
Yeah, well, Jeremy, let me tell you a story. So a few years ago, early on in this, really too long journey that I'd been on trying to figure this stuff out, I was really obsessed with looking at all the different system-based measures of productivity. I was looking at commits. I was looking at pull requests. I was looking at lines of code. I was looking at comments and pull requests. How long were the comments? Emojis, and way too deep into this stuff. And as I was doing that, and talking to developers and leaders about like, what do you guys measure? And like, no one had a good answer. No one knew how to measure any of this stuff. It sort of started to dawn on me that every question that we were trying to answer with like the telemetry data, let me give you an example. Like, people really wanted to understand the quality of code reviews being submitted. It was really easy to count how many code reviews were happening and how quickly they were happening. But of course, the flip side of that is like, how good are the code reviews? It doesn't matter if people are just, LGTM thumbs up on the code. That's not really a review. And people started asking me, hey, like, can we count the ratio of like comments in each pull request? And that's kind of like, that was like the what broke the straw. Like, it was
No, we can't.
when we got that request, I thought to myself, what are we doing here? Like, almost every question that we wanted to ask with our data, we could just ask our developers instead. Like, instead of like proxying how good our code reviews through the number of the characters and bytes in the comments, why not just ask our developers? Like, instead of trying to understand if we're being more productive based on the number of pull requests, which we know is pretty imperfect as a signal, like, what if we just ask our developers? And so this idea of, hey, if we can just ask our developers good questions, like, that'll give us data that answers most of the questions that businesses and leaders are actually trying to solve for. And around that same time, I connected with Nicole Forsgren, who, she wrote the book Accelerate, number of papers. And I started also working with folks at Microsoft Research. And I began to realize that the researchers do most of their measurement through surveys. They do it by asking developers questions. And so I started to kind of connect these two dots and realize that, man, like, you can collect way more data by just asking developers questions than you can by just looking at pull requests, tickets, and commits. And that's really sort of the underlying principle behind DevX, developer experience. This latest paper we published is, like, businesses need to understand that asking their developers is the best way to get really reliable data around what's holding back productivity, how to improve productivity. And people need to understand that when we say ask developers questions, we're not talking about like one-on-ones and retrospectives necessarily. We're talking about using rigorous survey, psychometric based approaches, which give us numbers, right? People kind of misassume that, asking, we just get this qualitative data back, like, we, whatever, it doesn't give us a metric. But, that's not the case. It's actually the case that we can get really interesting numbers by asking people questions. And most people, like, this kind of hits home when I tell people, hey, like, did you know that Google's annual State of the DevOps report and the DORA metrics, those benchmarks they publish each year, hey, did you know that that's all done through surveys?
Yeah.
And most people go, whoa, what? Like, everyone's trying to measure their DORA metrics through their tools, which is really hard to do. And, that's a whole nother story. But, I think that kind of answers your question. Like, this idea that, hey, if we just ask our developers questions, we can get way more data about what's holding back productivity and how things are going. And by asking developers questions, we kind of avoid that problem of them feeling like they're being measured by some really stupid metrics, right? And so you
Absolutely.
get that one as well.
Absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head in that it helps ensure that developers are treated like human beings, which you would think was a thing that we wouldn't have to talk about. But I've worked in a lot of organizations as a consultant and also as an FTE, and there are plenty of commoditization of what we do, right? Where the focus is more on the output of the machine, and we're treating our developers like a financial system, right? We're treating them like the stock market. We're not treating them like a living, breathing social network with lots of conversations that need to be had across multiple teams with multiple entry points of, this API is maintained by that team, that API is maintained by that team. How do we kind of figure out you have one feature that cross-cuts 5 to 6 different APIs because microservices has just completely ruined how fast we can get things done these days. But you have so many different pieces that you have to bring together, and it's all about the psychology of those teams and how they execute. And I love that concept. I've always been a student of psychology and also been an engineer. And I think that intersection is truly where productivity lies. It's about how are we enabling and managing the morale of our teams, as opposed to just looking at pull requests and story point carryover and velocity and all this stuff that just doesn't really mean much in a vacuum until you look at the context of the team that's operating and executing. So that's why I believe that DevX is a thing that we should, as an industry, we should spend our time talking about that instead of talking about how many story points and how many, what's our cycle time. Again, I love those things, but we should be focusing more on the psychology of our engineering teams instead of trying to expose this telemetry that we can then think we just, add another person to the team, right? Mythical man month. That never works. How many times have I had a leader tell me, we'll just add 2 more guys to your crew, it'll go faster? No, that's not how this works, right? And we need to educate, and that's why I love what you're doing, because we need to consistently and constantly educate our industry more on why it's important to look at these ideas than it is the ooh shiny that all the CEOs are going to be like, oh yeah, that's awesome. I can just, get a formula out of my engineering team and just plug in some numbers and I go faster. There is no secret sauce. There's no silver bullet. There's no free lunch. AI isn't going to solve all of our problems either, which was another episode that we've done. But I love this idea, and I want to double down on culture being the most important thing for your developer experience. How do you think that focusing on DX will enable better leadership? Because this is the problem, right? The folks that are running the teams. If you have an engineer that's running a team, perhaps there's some form of link there, which I think more technologists are moving up in the ranks, and that's a good thing for the safety and sanity of our teams. But how do you think this is going to improve leadership, and where are some hooks into the senior leadership team that you see that we can start bubbling this idea up?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, one thing I always like to point out is that this education we're doing, this approach, this focus on DevX, it's actually something that the top tech companies have been doing for years, right? I mentioned
Yes.
like Google's coming out with papers, Google, Microsoft, Spotify, LinkedIn, Shopify, etc. All these companies have been doing developer surveys for a long time. They have PhDs, data scientists, a lot of people focused on gathering this information and analyzing it. And Google frequently talks about how their surveys give them better data than their telemetry based metrics. And they have a lot of telemetry at Google because they're on, a very standardized developer toolkit. But to answer your question, from a leadership perspective, there's like 2 ways you can help developers be more productive. One way is you try to like pressure them and like force them to just like type faster, right? You like give them a deadline that's unreasonable, and you try to make them stay up all night, work weekends, just move faster, right? Like move faster. The other way to help developers go faster is to actually like unblock them, like allow them to move faster by improving the processes and the tools and the ways in which they work. There's only really those 2 options, like at a high level. Like you can either try to like whip them or you can try to help them.
Right.
And DevX is about the latter approach. It's about helping them. And I think a lot of the other metrics like story points and commits are coming at it from more like the let's whip them sort of
Yep.
mentality, where it's like, oh, we're just gonna measure you, and we like, this number better go up, or else we're gonna like decommission your team or like lay you off, right? That's
Right.
kind of like, or you're gonna be like behind the pack, and like bad things are gonna happen. It's kind of the ethos of those types of metrics. And so, from a leadership perspective, companies that view their developers as a true asset, right? Like a true asset to their business. They view software as a huge, they're either their core product or a huge value driver to the business. Like, leaders who view their organization in that way, for them, like, DevX is like the most obvious thing they've ever heard of. It's like, oh yeah, this is already what they're trying to do, is like help their developers be more productive. Oh, like, this is a systematic way to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
For the people who are used to viewing their developers as more so like the cogs in the wheel, and view them as like an unwanted expense, and lazy people who are trying to like secretly not at their desks all day, blah blah blah. For those people, DevX is probably a bit of a difficult proposition, right? Because like this idea that you would like ask your developers, hey, like, what's holding you back, like, is kind of in conflict with the idea that they're actually lazy and not working hard enough, or are just stupid or something, right? So like I said, I think you can all kind of boil it down to like, how do you think about productivity? Is it about whipping people, or is it about helping and enabling people? And as soon as you kind of choose your path, like, I think the types of metrics and the way you understand productivity is like pretty clear, right? Which path you should choose.
Agreed. And I've fought sort of the bullshit toxic culture, pardon my French, for a long time, having been in the situation where I was given deadlines that were completely unreasonable, and you have no choice, right? You have no choice but to stand up and say, all right, well, I'm just going to go and I'm going to do what you need to do, or do what I need to do rather, to solve this problem and to keep, a paycheck coming in, and we want to, I love the idea of educating folks that developers are humans too. And I think the vast majority of industry gets this by now, right? The Agile revolution was a big thing that helped people start focusing on people and process, not tools, which is, like item 1 in the Agile manifesto. And I think that has helped folks come around to the idea that developers aren't just sitting around screwing around on their laptops and not doing anything all day, and you have to install agents to watch what you do. Chase, I'm looking at you. Like, there's all kinds of just toxic things that people have done over the years that have proven to be false. And when instead you focus, again, as you said, on morale and on ensuring that your team is psychologically safe and they can have blameless postmortems and they can have a conversation about a mistake, you're enabling this fast feedback loop inside your engineering team, which is something that we don't have. Like, the Agile revolution claims that retrospectives matter. I'm sorry, they don't. I've never seen a retrospective matter once. Maybe at like Capital One or some other really fashion-forward, a company that really does care about doing Agile Scrum the right way. I've rarely seen my feedback matter, other than complaining about this team didn't get their thing across the line fast enough, at which point now people are leaning on that team instead of on my team. So I think that leaders need to take a very close look at DX and DevX as a way of life and as a thing that will elevate your team 10x, right? Because everybody wants to be a part of something that cares about them, right? I want to come into work every day and know that what I'm doing matters and that what I'm doing is valued by someone else in the organization, right? Unless I'm just out for a paycheck, which is a different thing. If you implement DevX correctly, you will get a lift in retention. I guarantee you. I haven't even done a study on this, Abi, and I can bet you $1,000 right now that you will see a lift on your retention if you start caring about what people think and asking them questions, right? And the general population of your engineers, you will find, will be very loyal, and they will focus on developing value instead of just getting their tickets across the line and stop caring. As a consulting firm, this is what I'm selling, right? I want people to walk in the door at a client and be able to ask hard questions and to challenge status quo and to make things better. But a lot of leadership and a lot of companies don't want that, and they see that as a threat to their way of life. And I think it's time to threaten that traditional toxic way of life with focusing on developer experience as being the key piece to making your team more valuable to the organization, and also producing more valuable software that can then be, make your company worth more money, which I guess is what we're doing these days, right?
Absolutely.
Hey,
Cool.
this has been an amazing episode, Abi. Thank you so much for joining. Again, I've stalked you for many years. It's the first time I've gotten to talk to you, so I'm very excited. And talk about your website. Talk about DevX. How can people find you on the internet? Because I want to drive what you're doing to the moon.
Yeah, as you know, I post a lot on LinkedIn, so follow me on LinkedIn for several posts a week around DevOps and how to measure developer productivity and the latest research and insights. You can learn more about my company at getdx.com. I also run a newsletter, newsletter.abinoda.com, weekly newsletter focused on summarizing and bringing perspectives and research around developer productivity to engineering leaders. So those are the best ways to follow me. And yeah, likewise, Jeremy, it was great meeting you in person. And thanks for having me on your show.
Awesome. Thanks, Abi. Have a great one. We'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks for joining.